Join me back in Genesis chapter 1, please. Genesis chapter 1. We've been looking at the first section, the first few verses of Genesis 1 a few times now. And when you look at 1 and 2 and 3 and right in there, just the very beginning of it, remind me of a couple of things that we've discussed that come to your mind when you look at that section. Just hit me with a few things, just a few. In the beginning, right, there was a beginning. It's hard for us to imagine a time when all of this didn't exist and when time didn't exist. We just really struggle with that. And why do we struggle with that mainly? Why do we struggle with it mainly? Time dictates our lives. And what have we never, ever experienced? Life without time, pre-beginning. We've never experienced that. So we don't know what it's like. It's a hard thing for us. What else? What else have we discussed in that section? God's power. It's pretty evident there, isn't it? Pretty evident that in the beginning, God created. You have God then later on speaking things into existence. God said, "Let there be light," down in verse 3. And when you contemplate that kind of power, it's beyond us. It's so far beyond us that it causes some folks to really struggle with it. And they say, "Well, I don't see how that could be." Well, of course we don't see how that could be. We're the created aspect of it all. We're part of the creation, not part of the creator. We're not going to understand that kind of power. Can we look at it and see it and recognize it if we're so willing to do? Surely we can. We can see what has been created. There's other passages in the text that indicate to us the ongoing nature of God's power. Jesus holds all things together by what? The power of His Word. It is His will, if you will, that holds it all together, that keeps things going as they go, that keeps the orbits happening and all of that. We sometimes forget that the power of God is on display not merely in the beginning of creation, but it's on display right now in creation continuing as it is and doing what it does. So God's power is so obvious there, and we talked about it a little bit. What else is there, just in the first couple of verses that you remember?
His ever-present type, the hovering business.
Okay. He is there over His creation, looking at His creation. It is a fascinating thing to think of God observing His creation, but we see that in many places in the text, right? The thing that always pops into my mind about that is in Exodus chapter 3, where God sees His people, He remembers His people, He visits His people. It's not as if He had forgotten about them. It is that now is the time for me to deal with them. But you get that idea here of God brooding over what He has created. Now, we tend to think in terms of high and low, right? Heaven's high, earth's low, and so He had to be above it in order to do that. That's probably not the way it works. We operate in a realm that has a spiritual realm operating with it concurrently. We've talked about that, so we understand how that works to the extent we can. And so it is not that God has to be physically, literally above it in order to see it. It is that He exists separate from it, since He created it and He exists separate from His creation. So He observes it. He sees it. That's how it is that a being like God can be omnipresent, can be everywhere all the time. He's not either at where the moon is so He can see that side of the earth, and then to see the other side He's got to switch positions. It's not like that. He exists separate from it, and so He can see it all. He can observe it all. And that's one of the things that's just amazing to us. Anything else before we get back into verse 3? Anything else that we've discussed before verse 3?
Well, we talked about, Todd, this business of if we can't rightly deal with the passages that indicate that God created things, then the rest of the text will be almost impossible for us to feel as authoritative and something that we must relate to.
Yeah, this story of creation for some folks is a stopping point. Well, I can't get past that because I don't understand how that could be. We talked about the story of Jonah and the big fish that God prepared. If we can't get past that, then we never learn the lessons of Jonah. We never get the good that's there. The different thing about this section is, as Brother Bailey said, if we can't get this, if we cannot say, okay, by faith I'm going to understand this as the way it happened, if we can't do that, then the rest of the text doesn't matter. Jonah is irrelevant. Nothing else matters if I can't get a hold of this. Is there evidence that relates to this? Is there evidence that relates to in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? Go like this. There is evidence related to it. All over the place, there's evidence related to it. But I'll tell you this, faith comes by what? Hearing what? The Word of God. You're not going to get faith sufficient to accept this by reading verses 1 and 2 and then sitting there. You're not going to get it that way. It isn't designed for you to get it that way. 1 and 2, as in Romans 1, is designed to point you to something that you then go investigate, and by faith and understanding God's Word, you come back to this and say, okay, I get it now. I understand it now. But don't think I'm going to read Genesis 1 and 2 and go, okay, I have faith sufficient for everything I need because I believe that God created it all. Faith comes from the bulk of, or the understanding of, God's Word in total, not just one little section. And that's why in Romans chapter 1, the Apostle Paul said, you could see God. You could know there was a God by what? Creation, by the things around you. You could know there was a God, but you need to understand more than that. You need to dig deeper than that. And as you dig deeper than that, you come to a point where you realize there's no other option. It's not that I have looked at all of the options and picked the one that I think works. It's that you get to a point where you realize there's no other option. I have looked at the option and said that's the option. And so when you think about that sort of thing, it simplifies life for us. It's one of the things we've talked about. It simplifies life. There's these ideas out there. We discussed the Big Bang a while back and things related to it. There's the gap theory. There's the idea that says, okay, we're going to say God created it, but he didn't do it like he did it here. We're going to add some things to the story, add some time to the story, because I want God to be the creator. I have this innate desire for God to be the creator, but I cannot accept this 6 days business, so I'm going to make years out of all this. I'm going to put time in between all of this. It solves nothing. If God created it, then God created it the way God said God created it. And so we're not solving anything by trying to come up with a new way other than what it simply says. So when we think through all of that, it simplifies things for us. And then the more you put together other references, like John chapter 1, the more you put together other references like Romans chapter 1, the more you consider the different things like things the Hebrew writer said about creation, the more you put all that together, you understand that there is a comprehensive answer to how you got here. And if there is a comprehensive answer to how you got here, then there is also within that answer, within the answer of how you got here, there is an answer of why am I here, right? Because you got here for a reason. And once you get to that point, I'm telling you, life simplifies. The pursuit of things on earth really gets easier because you understand what's really important. So Genesis 1 and 2 really are helpful. We just touched on verse 3 last week. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, one day. So beginning with verse 3, what's a big challenge for us that we just kind of have to deal with and get out of the way with God creating light in verse 3? What comes later? Yeah, the beings that produce light, or that from our perspective produce light. If there's no sun for us, how can there be light? We kind of struggle with that from a logistics standpoint, right? If you take away the thing that makes the thing, you don't have the thing anymore, right? That's kind of how we look at things. And so what you have here, though, is a different look at the creative process. And we talked about the process that God is involved in, and he's showing us what day-to-day life's going to be like by going through days of processes and so on. But if God didn't create the things that make the light, then what did God create? Because we know later on he's going to create the stars, the two great lights, verse 16, and so on. So this isn't the fourth day, this is the first day. What did God create? How would you describe or explain what God created on the first day when you have on the fourth day the sun, the moon, the stars, and all those beings that emit light? What did he create? Okay.
To me, this is somewhat of a, okay, I'm going to draw a line in the sand figuratively.
Okay, that's exactly where I'm going to go.
There's light.
Yeah.
And I'm light. And then everything outside of me is darkness. And we're going to see that thing throughout the text
Yeah.
over and over again. If you're not with me, you're with something else. And that something else is darkness or the absence of God.
Okay, very good. Very good. At the outset, God establishes the contrast, the struggle, the contention that's going to exist on earth ongoingly. That's just what it is. And He is showing us there's going to be light, there's going to be dark, and they're going to be separate. And I'm not telling you this now, but I'm one and Satan's the other. I'm one and I'm not the other. And so there is a sense in which what God is saying is illumination is the beginning of it all. Now, there is also a very physical, literal sense in that He is creating that which produces light, energy. When you think about light, it is merely a what? If I use the word energy and light, what is light in its simplest form? It is a form of energy. That's what it is. Are there other forms of energy? Absolutely, there are other forms of energy. So whether you're talking about illuminative capacity or any other kind of energy, God has created all of that because He's about to put into place beings, celestial beings and others, that rely on that operate in view of the energy that He's created. And so, yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. That light, which I understand what you're saying, then the sun was created later.
Mm-hmm.
But before the sun was created, plants and trees and all of those things, so does that not refute the gap theory?
Oh, it absolutely does, yeah.
So, but if you're explaining that to someone, they could go back to, well, that was light, because there's energy within light.
Yes. I'm not saying there wasn't light.
No, I know. But how do you explain that to someone that refutes the gap theory, which I believe it does? But my question is, how do I explain the two lights separately? Because I understand what you're saying. I'm not trying to get...
No, how about this? How about when God created light, He literally created light. Okay, and so the created world is now illuminated, right? To the extent He wants it to be, it's illuminated. He's going to create the plants and all that. Now, we don't need to get into our minds that the plants that are created are dependent upon the light just yet. Okay, they're created as He wants them to be created. They don't need anything at this point to exist. It's a day arrangement. And the gap theory says, well, if the plants are going to be there for millions of years, they have to have what? And they also have to have what else? Rain and so on. So the whole process of plants existing requires animals also. True, you got to have some pollination going on. So that kind of helps dispel this the surface of the gap theory. But the idea is God did create light, the energy of it all, and probably the visibility aspect of light. I have no problem with that. Then He assigned it to those beings when they were put in place. That makes perfect sense as well. But I would suggest to you that in the creative process, light being created is more than just, I'm going to light up this world. Because He knows what He created absent the light. He's creating the things that the rest of creation are going to need to exist. That's just kind of how it is. And it has to be that way when you look at the processes that are going to occur. So before He created plants or animals, He created an earth upon which plants and animals could exist. That's just simply logical, isn't it? We understand that. And so light and energy and all of the things that relate to light are created in order to sustain or to be present for everything else that's going to come. It's a very logical process. So from a physical standpoint, yes, God created light, literal light, no problem with that at all. The beings will be, the celestial beings will be assigned their responsibilities later on. The moon doesn't get to generate or create light. The sun gets to do that. What does the moon get to do? It has a luminosity aspect to it. It gets to reflect light. So God's going to assign all that later. But don't miss the overriding bigger point in all of this, that God is establishing for us, that He is the illumination being. He is the one who provides what we need. That's helpful then when you go to John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, where in Him was life, and that life was the light of men. You have there Jesus being the one who shows us how to live. He is still there, the one who provides clarity, the one who lets us see what we need to see. And then you think in terms of, well, Jesus said in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Remember that? And if you walk in me, you don't walk in what? Darkness. And so you have that contrast that is here in the beginning. God is establishing in the beginning the way things are going to be. And it's always going to be like this. Putting the sun in place for us to have light is not the challenge. The challenge is for us to realize who provides illumination and clarity in life as we live our lives. And that's God. He is the one. Back to the beginning, God put all this in place. And He is the one who, well, has shown us what we need to know. So there is a literal aspect to it. Without question, there is a literal aspect to God said, let there be light, and there was light. Yes. There is also a not really figurative, but a ongoing process lesson involved in this, because God's going to show us who He is and what light really looks like, what it really is. It's related to us living as we ought to live so we can spend eternity with Him absent darkness. You and I have trouble with darkness also. Who has been somewhere where it's absolutely, completely 100% dark? No ambient light whatsoever. Right? Where? The desert? Okay. All right. I'm sorry? Spelunking. We don't use that word up here very often. Spelunking. Cave running, yes, in caves. Anybody else? Any way other than caves? Yes, sir?
Well, yeah, it was a 3 million gallon clear well at Lake Fort Smith.
Okay.
Just under the ground, pretty much a cave, where you have no, the only entry point is patches big.
No light. No light. That's kind of a creepy thing when you really think about, I can't get to light. Usually we have a way of turning on a light and seeing what's around us. And when we don't have a way of doing that, things get a little bit uncomfortable, right? If you're in a cave, say, just for example, say you're 2 or 3 miles into a cave and you realize that the batteries powering your lights are going to go out shortly. Is that a small thing or a big thing? It's a pretty big thing for most of us. Most of us look around and go, uh-oh, I have a problem. And it's a problem I can't solve because I can't generate light. I can't make light. When you think about the darkness, the absolute darkness that very few of us really get to see, that helps you understand the contrast that's being built here between God and Satan. If you look back at it, God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. That's what He did. All throughout the New Testament, you're going to have contrast between light and dark, between day and night. You're going to have those contrasts because God's wanting us to see that one is good, helpful, provides what you need. One allows you to do the things that need to be done. The other is prohibitive. The other causes problems. The other can be very challenging for you if not handled correctly. And so there's a couple of aspects to the light business, 2 sides of it, one physical and one spiritual, much like everything else in this section. Yes, sir.
And verse 2 said,